Casino Royale garnered some of the best reviews and overall positive reactions of almost any other Bond film in the series. It was quite a turnaround to what was being said a year earlier, when everyone was taking potshots at Craig and already missing Brosnan. Casino Royale ended up being a huge hit. Craig's debut was greeted with praise. Some were proclaiming Craig as the best Bond ever. Ever. There was talk that he could get nominated for an Oscar. He didn't. The critics loved the movie. Audiences loved the movie. Sure, there were some that weren't fans of the film or Craig, but the majority embraced it. The gamble of Craig's casting and the darker and more realistic tone the film would take paid off. The movie was quite a contrast to Die Another Day. Casino Royale made it look like the cartoon that ran before the real movie. Man, that movie has aged badly. Is it me, or does it just look worse and worse every day? So, how did this happen? Well, for one thing, Casino Royale is a pretty damn good movie. It probably comes as no surprise that I was a big fan of it and think of it as one of the great Bond movies. There are a lot of things I like about Casino. First, it's a great updating of the original Fleming story. It stays true to Fleming's characters, scenes, lines.
The bitch is dead.
But along which updates it to 2006 and makes it all work. I still can't believe this was written by the same guys who wrote Die Another Day. Perhaps they were on their A game using the source material of Fleming's book and knew a lot was riding on this film and they better deliver. Maybe Paul Haggis's participation with the script lit a fire under their asses too. Second, Daniel Craig. Despite the reservations about his initial casting, he truly excelled in the role. He wasn't just playing the icon of 007 and letting the image do the work, stepping into a tux, carrying a gun, sipping martinis, but he made him an actual character. Not since Dalton's portrayal of Bond had the part been played with such an intensity. And Craig's Bond went even further. Was he going to win in the end? Sure. But it didn't look like it was just a given, and he would have to go through a lot before he was left standing in the end. Around this time, the popularity of the idea of rebooting a franchise started to catch on. Instead of just doing another sequel and being painted in a corner of what you could do and what would be expected with a new entry in a series or from a sequel, Hollywood would just shout out, "Reboot," and that would allow them to start from scratch with it. I don't know how they came up with the term reboot. I prefer the term do-over. That's what we used to call it as kids. But it's all semantics. It's basically starting a brand new story with characters that we've already seen before. The idea of rebooting James Bond puts some fans off. The Bond movies aren't like a linear chronological film series. Roles are recast, continuity isn't focused on, the same actors show up in different roles. If you start to try to figure out a timeline and make sense of it all, you'd go nuts. So this reboot opens up questions to fans as to how this movie affects the previous films. Do they exist within the Casino Royale timeline? Are all the previous Bond movies meant to happen years after the events of Casino Royale? Or is this a prequel, showing us how Bond got his 00 status and seeing him on his first mission? But if it's a prequel, then why is it taking place in modern day? Shouldn't it be taking place in the 1950s? And if this is a reboot, then why is Judi Dench playing M again? Shouldn't they have cast another actor as M? Listen, forget all that crap. If you're going to get hung up on all that stuff, you'll drive yourself crazy. Let's just say Casino Royale has no relation to any of the other Bond films. They just hit the reset button and want to start a new Bond adventure series and not be hampered by anything from the past films. They simply cast Dench as M because she's a good actress and was free at the time. Maybe they kept her wardrobe on hand from the last few films and thought they'd save some coin by just bringing her back. Her casting wasn't meant to make smoke come out of our heads. This whole idea of rebooting, or do-overing, with Bond, I thought actually worked out nicely. Like I said, in the past, the Brosnan films seemed to rely too heavily on the icon image of Bond that fans were familiar with. He wasn't really a character anymore, just the 007 image in another Bond adventure. They would include all the symbols that we all associated with James Bond, but the character himself was just a body filling the tux. That's another thing I really like about Casino Royale. The film takes all those Bond emblems and tries to give them a tweak. I dissected the components of what makes a Bond movie in my Bond Blueprint project. Some of those elements aren't present in Casino. Maybe the absence of them is what prompted some fans to label Casino as not being a Bond movie. There's no Q, no Moneypenny, no Bond theme. Craig's Bond is not the sophisticated character that 007 has always been. A lot of people felt he's more like James Bourne than James Bond. But in my mind, yeah, there's no opening gun barrel to Casino Royale, but is that really that big of a deal? It's always been great to see that intro, but the whole film doesn't fall apart because they don't have that. I might be sounding hypocritical, but yeah, I consider Casino Royale a Bond movie. Casino attempts to focus on other things that the series ignored for a long time, like the Bond character, which has been long overdue. The film just doesn't rely on the inclusion of all those cool Bond stamps for the recognition factor, but they try to do something different with them when they come up. There's a different slant to them. They're there, but they try to freshen them up. The fact this is a new Bond at the beginning of his career helps. It's already explained that here he's not the character that we know. He's on the road to becoming that character. There's definitely an influence from the Bourne films on Casino Royale. I see more of that in Quantum of Solace with the action scenes, but in Casino, the fights are very reminiscent of Bourne's fight scenes. I don't really have a problem with that. When the Bond films first began, they were original. They were carving out a template of action films that hadn't existed before. Other films would go on to emulate the 007 films. Now, 40 years later, it's unusual that that's been reversed, and now Bond is taking cues from other action films. The Bourne flicks were a clear marker of where Bond had to go after Die Another Day. Even without Bourne around, everyone knew that Bond had to get grittier. Everyone loves using that word to describe Craig's Bond, by the way. Gritty. Grittier. He's so gritty. This is a gritty Bond. They should have just called this movie Gritty Royale. Dalton was doing gritty way back when, and he got dumped on for it. Now Craig was getting praise. I guess it's all in the timing. Anyway, the style of the Bourne films work for a James Bond film. Much more than whatever films that had influenced Die Another Day. I don't know what they were, The Matrix or Triple X, The Mummy? Who knows? This feels like less a James Bond movie than Casino Royale to me. Director Martin Campbell, the first time back since GoldenEye, immediately shakes things up without the gun barrel. We fade in on an office building in Prague in black and white, and we get our first glimpse of Craig as Bond, sitting coolly as he's about to execute Dryden, an MI6 traitor. It's a nice intro to Craig. The whole thing is a moody, quintessential spy scene. It's intercut with Bond's brutal takedown of Dryden's accomplice. As Dryden realizes that Bond is about to earn his 00 status, and he is going to be his second kill, they have an interesting exchange that sets up what Bond will be dealing with in the story.
Made you feel it, did he?
Death and killing in this Bond movie will be leaving an impact. This is also the beginning of an unusual theme of Craig's Bond showing up in bathrooms. There's always been these scenes of James Bond in bathrooms. Kind of a fun game to play if you're really desperate for something to do to pass the time. Like, really desperate. Craig takes going to the wee-wee room to a new level for 007. It practically becomes a motif for Craig's Bond. I think he hangs out more in bathrooms than anywhere else. Maybe that's one of the ways they were going to make him grittier. At least this fight in the bathroom, the bad guy isn't dropping a deuce like he was when Brosnan took his bathroom bad guy out. By the way, it's kind of interesting to note that Bond's kill of Dryden's contact in that John, he initially thinks was by drowning him. Perhaps a little foreshadowing there? But the waterworks didn't do the job. The guy is alive, and that's when Bond shoots him dead, earning his 00 status and appearing in a gun barrel. Once he earns his 00 status, that's when he earns the gun barrel too. I'm guessing that's the rationale. And that takes us to the credit sequence. Chris Cornell does the title song. No, oh, not that one. Here it is. No Casino Royale in the lyrics, but the lyrics of You Know My Name describe the kind of Bond we're about to see. We got lyrics like, if you take a life, do you know what you'll give? Are you willing to die? The coldest blood runs through my veins. This is pretty heavy stuff. This ain't Nobody Does It Better. I've always had a thing for playing cards, and the motif of using the suits and colors is pretty cool, and as with the best title sequences in the series, it uses images that illustrate the story. There's no Maurice Binder's silhouetted naked chicks prancing around holding guns, but still, it's a pretty unique looking title sequence. It's probably one of my favorites in the series. The boxy cutouts of men running around fighting kind of reminds me of those old classic Saul Bass movie posters. We get dropped in to meet the main villain of the film, Le Chiffre, played by Mads Mikkelsen. Through an introduction by the mysterious Mr. White, Le Chiffre arrives in Uganda to pick up a truckload of cash from Obano, a leader of a freedom fighting force. Le Chiffre is going to take care of his banking finances. Obano agrees with Le Chiffre's no-risk offer, but the devious Le Chiffre already has other plans for it. The money isn't even loaded in the truck yet, and he's already scheming. Meanwhile, in Madagascar, Bond is tailing bondmaker Malacca, when Bond's klutzy partner gives himself away. This ignites a foot chase of Bond trying to keep up with this agile jackrabbit. It's a really exciting chase. A guy chasing another guy. It's as simple as it can be, but the editing, stunts, music, and the actors really make it a memorable action scene. Sebastian Foucan, who was the founder of Free Running, gets to display his unique talents, and it makes this a very thrilling action sequence. The one part I'm not crazy about is Bond driving the bulldozer. It reminds me too much of the needless Brosnan destruction he left behind.
McDonald's Monster Jam. Brought to you by series sponsors Advance Auto Parts and Ford Trucks. Superstars. Don't miss a second of all the high-flying, cyclone spinning, car crushing action. Monster Jam. February 11th, 12th, and 13th.
We have Bond in this huge bulletproof bulldozer driving right at this poor guy. It seems like way too much of an uneven match. My sympathies are with the poor bomb maker here, hoping he can outrun this thing. Luckily that ends, and the odds quickly are against Bond, who is the one struggling to keep up with this guy. It's refreshing to see actual relatable threats for Bond during the whole thing, where he can get hurt and bruised up. It makes an action scene much more effective if you believe there is some danger to our main character. Something that we haven't seen for Bond in a while. There's some CGI used to erase wires, and I'm guessing helps some shots, but it never gets distracting, and you probably wouldn't even think of looking for them. Bond is barely keeping up with the guy, but he's so fixated on catching him, he manages to overcome any obstacle in his way.
Kid Super Value seats are still just $8.
Not only by using strength, but with his wits, too. Charging into the embassy, having guards shoot at him, getting completely surrounded. As soon as he gets the chance, Bond exercises his license to kill and shoots Malacca dead. an act that will have repercussions for Bond and the story. It's quite a turnaround from when, a while ago, he instructed his partner he needed him alive.
Holster the bloody weapon, Carter. I need him alive.
So something changed somewhere along the lines. This starts one of the themes in the film of Bond's ego. He's never willing to accept defeat, even if defeat means ultimately winning the big game in the long run. Not willing to give up Malacca, he just would rather kill him, not looking at what M tells him is the bigger picture. The films have touched on Bond's arrogance and ego before, but
of course, I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond.
In Casino, it comes to the forefront of his character, and it becomes something he has to overcome as much as the villain. Mads Mikkelsen's Le Chiffre makes one of the more memorable recent Bond villains for me. Obviously, the character was the first villain Bond ever faced, and there is something unique about him. He's not what we've come to expect from the film villains, with worldwide domination plans, hanging out in big hideouts with armies of guys at his disposal. Le Chiffre is more of a scheming little underling. He has very basic motivations for what he does in the story: greed and survival. Mikkelsen does a very good job with the part. You hate the guy, but I also feel scared for him when the pressure heats up. He's not as much of a physical threat as the interpretation from the book. He doesn't carry around razor blades, but he's got his asthma inhaler and a scarred eye that weeps blood. Those traits are enough to make him a colorful villain. The eye, the filmmakers probably gave him since they knew there would be a lot of staring across the poker table, and would look a bit more sinister than just a regular eye. Actually, in Casino Royale, a lot of the bad guys have something going on with their left eye. It's either covered or scarred, kind of a throwback to Largo and Thunderball. I thought maybe they were going to continue this pattern somehow in Quantum of Solace, as we learn more about this evil organization Quantum. That didn't really happen though. By the way, the Asian lady who likes playing cards with Le Chiffre is Sai Chin, from You Only Live Twice. So unknowingly, Bond causes a bump with Le Chiffre's plan that now he has to fix. M arrives home and finds Bond hanging out in her pad. Here Bond gets a lecture, something we've seen M give him many times. She lectures him on his ego and refers to him as a blunt instrument, a line I was really happy they included. I also enjoyed Bond learning what the title M stands for, which Dench quickly cuts him off at. Despite M criticizing him, it's clear that Bond has some talents and can be effective when he wants to be. Breaking into M's house, knowing her passwords. M might not know how he does it, but she must realize he can be a benefit to have around. It's a bit more interesting than how she referred to Brosnan's talents in The World Is Not Enough.
Construction's not exactly my speciality.
Quite the opposite, in fact.
There, he just destroyed stuff. Instead of sending him away on a mission, she basically just tells him to get lost. And naturally, one of the best places to get lost in is the Bahamas.
Nassau.
So Bond takes to the road in a Ford Mondeo. It's just a rental. And he goes about tracking down where this mysterious ellipsis text originated from. Here we get an idea of how Bond surveys an area and manages to manipulate things to get in or learn whatever he needs to. This is probably how he broke into M's home. He did a distraction with the doorman, swiped the key, probably something like that. Thanks to surveillance tapes, we get a glimpse of the famous Aston Martin, this time owned by a bad guy. Again, a different spin to things. Fortunately, Alex Demetrius sent his text in full view of the camera, so Bond can easily ID him. It's a pretty, very, extremely lucky break for Bond here. It seems awfully convenient, but I'm still with it, and it doesn't break my suspension of disbelief completely. I could get nitpicky with this, but it's an effective visual solution to further the story. But still, like right in full view of the camera. But, okay. With the help of a cute chick from reception, Bond finds out Demetrius is home, and scopes him and his wife out. Solange, played by Katerina Murnau, is pretty freaking hot. Craig gets to do a beefcake shot at the beach, and honestly, I never even considered this to be a role reversal of the famous Ursula Andress scene, until someone mentioned it to me. I just never put the two scenes together. I guess this can be viewed as a homage, but Bond isn't walking out of the ocean or carrying seashells or anything like that. He's just swimming and stands up to check out the hot brunette on the horse. He doesn't have a knife strapped to his leg. So if this is a homage, it's a pretty subtle one. It's certainly much less implied than that ridiculous Jinx one, where they were pounding our heads like, do you get it? Do you get it? Is it obvious enough for you? Here there's a point to the scene other than just doing a homage. But I suppose if it was an intentional shout-out, there's a twist to it, with Bond now being the one gawked at instead of Honey Rider. Sort of a sex reversal thing going on, which will occur again in the film, actually. Bond heads to the hotel, defeats Demetrius, wins his Aston Martin, and picks up Solange. Here again is another traditional Bond scene. He's going to heat up the bad girl and she's going to give up some information. In the past, these chicks were easy obstacles for Bond. Most were just swooning at his feet and only realized what he was up to after it was too late. Here, Solange knows exactly what he's after, but is perfectly willing to answer his questions about her husband for a night of fun. She's planning on using Bond as much as he's going to use her. She's smarter than the old bubble-headed Bond girls, the ones who were so filled with desire Bond had them eating out of his hand. The only words they could muster was, "Oh, James." We all know Solange still doesn't have too much time left, though. She'll be a sacrificial lamb, an essentially nice person. Here she talks about her regrets of never hooking up with a nice guy. But it's too late for that. She's going to be pushing up daisies real soon. It's the same result, but the movie makes another adjustment getting there. And she does look great in that satin dress. An extended sequence commences, with Bond following Demetrius to Miami at his rendezvous at one of those body exhibit shows. Hey, a poker table with corpses. Coincidence? Probably not. Demetrius becomes a new addition to the exhibit, and Bond is hot on the trail of his contact headed to the airport. The whole thing is very well done. There's very little dialogue for the next 10 minutes. It amps up the tension very nicely, and once the chase hits the runway, we get a lot of good stunts. It incorporates the airport setting. We have vehicles getting smashed, planes trying to land. It's all great stuff. I can't help but think of the truck chase from Raiders watching some of this. But that's a good action scene to try to emulate. Craig's Bond seems a little too indestructible at times. He jumps off that gas truck like that, and I would think it would be a bit tougher for anyone to get back up on their feet. But he just hops up and gets back to doing his running thing. I have this thing that I can't help but notice scenes taking place at night in a movie, and it usually has wet pavement. It's like it's always just rained. Obviously the filmmakers do this intentionally because wet pavement looks more dynamic on film and it picks up the reflections and stuff. But every time I see a night scene, I'm always aware of it. Aside from some minor quibbles, it's a pretty great action scene, and I love the smirk Bond gives in the end after the bad guy blows himself up. The idiot. Once again, Bond really screwed up Le Chiffre's plans, and to solve this problem and get back all of the money Bond cost him, he sets up the poker game at Casino Royale. We get the discovery of Solange's body, and M assigning Bond to join Le Chiffre's game and win. If Bond wins, they can force Le Chiffre to talk for protection. If Bond loses, Le Chiffre will just keep doing a lot of bad things.
When they analysed the stock market after 9/11, the CIA discovered a massive shorting of airline stocks. When the stocks hit bottom on 9/12, somebody made a fortune. The same thing happened this morning with Skyfleet stock, or was supposed to. With their prototype destroyed, the company would be near bankruptcy. Instead, somebody lost over $100 million betting the wrong way.
This is the first time the series actually addresses 9/11 and actually manages to weave those events into the story. Die Another Day did make a reference to it, but it really was kind of vague.
While you were away, the world changed.
Not for me.
Like M could be referring to anything. Well, what's changed? Bond. Walker, Texas Ranger has ended. Bond gets his tracking device implanted. This is one of the few high-tech gadget thingies in the movie. I don't think anyone was too surprised there really wasn't any in Casino Royale. Had the filmmakers started to think far enough ahead and decided on actors who would go on to play Q and Moneypenny, they could have included them in Casino. Here's Q. Not a line of dialogue, just setting his character up for a bigger role in future films. M has a secretary in the film. They could have had this guy Villers been an uncredited Moneypenny. But I guess at this point Babs and Mike weren't thinking that far ahead and figured it would be easier to not even include the characters yet.
I have a dinner jacket.
There are dinner jackets and dinner jackets. This is the latter.